We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
As a longtime Dolphin fan, I grew up in that Marino era. So seeing him never get it, and then especially seeing Elway get that second Super Bowl and then ride off into the sunset, that had to be painful. I'm sure it still plagues Marino now, but as a fan, it's rough.
It's September 99, Dolphins at Broncos. This is Remember That Game, the podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my guest is Jennifer Eakins, fantasy football content manager over at 4for4 and BetSperts. So we're headed to Mile High, where the reigning two-time champion Broncos are celebrating the retired John Elway in the season-opening Monday Nighter while hosting your Miami Dolphins. How much does the 38-3 playoff loss earlier that year still sting in Marino and Elway's last head-to-head?
Rough loss, and as we all know, Marino never got it. So I moved to Denver in 1996. So I moved, I grew up in Florida, a huge Dolphin fan my whole life, and I moved to Denver in 1996, like right when kind of that second phase of Elway started, where they won those two back-to-back Super Bowls. I don't know if it was a direct rivalry between the two, and I think, I don't know. Broncos Dolphins wasn't really on my radar as far as a rivalry. It came to be a little bit just because I lived here, and it was really annoying. I mean, people here still worship the ground that John Elway walks on and walked on back then. So it was more of a, like, you show up in a town, and everyone was just completely obsessed, and it was just kind of annoying to me. And then they actually went on to do really well those 2 years, which was even more annoying. But I don't think it was a direct rivalry, at least for me. My rival, loyalties and all of that, as far as my childhood, is of course the AFC East with the Jets and the Patriots. But like I said, for me, it was more of a just, so much Bronco fever and all when I first moved here, and I was just like, ugh. And then of course they had to win. So that's why this specific game was so exciting, because they just, they knocked them down a peg or two.
Wow. So you're in Denver for all of that. And the Dolphins are in Denver here Monday night, week 1, after being in Denver, their final game the previous season in the divisional. Yep, Elway's in the booth, and Marino's still out there trying to get a ring. As Mike Tirico said in ABC's intro package, only a championship stands between Dan Marino and fulfillment. Jen, did it feel that way as a Dolphins or Marino fan?
Yeah, I mean, that year, I feel like 99, it was kind of, they were all in, right? They had a tremendous defense. Even rewatching this game, I was like, God, that defense was so good. Jason Taylor, Zach Thomas, some of those just really, really good. Patrick Surtain, amazing defense. They went all in. They brought Tony Martin. They got a couple good draft picks. Like, I think that was the year they were really thinking that they could do it. So, it was a great start, clearly, because as we'll get to, they won this game. But it was a bummer. I will say the one thing that was exciting about this game, I did see somewhere in the graphics when watching this game that 5 of 12 former Super Bowl champs had lost in a row there week 1. And then this game made it 6. So that was kind of exciting. Yeah. But yeah, as a longtime Dolphin fan, I grew up in that Marino era. So seeing him never get it, and then especially seeing Elway get that second Super Bowl and then ride off into the sunset, that had to be painful. I'm sure it still plagues Marino now, but as a fan, it's rough. We really, you want to see these guys, especially these legends. I mean, Dan Marino still holds plenty of records and just never got, only got to one Super Bowl when he was young. I mean, early in his career, and then never even got back to the actual game, which is a bummer as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned that defense, number one in defense the season prior. Jim Johnson as coach, always had this good units in Dallas, and third year here with Miami. And unlike that game last year, the blowout in Denver, they have Jason Taylor this time around. Got hit with the injury bug down the stretch in '98. Taylor injured reserve final week of the regular season. That's a tough break. He was 6th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. And he'll get on the highlight reel tonight. But did that rout against Denver the previous year feel representative of how far apart those teams really were? Terrell Buckley said, it was injuries. That was a different team.
I feel like the Dolphins were a few key pieces away. I don't think they were as far apart as that game indicated. And I feel like I said, heading into 99, Johnson, I know, almost retired the year before. He was close. And in fact, in that, when watching the game, I think it was Al Michaels was talking about, he had 7 boxes in his car. Like, he literally had packed up his office. He was about to leave, and I guess they convinced him to stay. So I know they were all in to try to get that 99 Super Bowl win. I mean, I think like I said, I don't think that score really indicated, but I do feel I think they were a little closer. I would like to think, at least looking back now, that they were pretty close.
Seemed like, that game could have been closer. Both teams come back with a lot of the same players. This season. Broncos are still expected to be really good. The announcer saying before the game in the AFC, it's down to Dolphins and Broncos as part of the 2 or 3 teams to beat in the AFC that year, even with Brian Griese making his debut start. And it begins similar to the way it did in that divisional round last season. Dolphins offense sputtering a bit early. Marino nearly picked off by a linebacker. And the son of Bob Griese, 61-yard pass to the father of Luke McCaffrey. His other son, Christian, happens to now be coworkers with Brian Griese. But early on, are you like, oh no, even without Elway, it's happening again?
A little bit. I was excited to see Griese. Maybe many people may not remember this, but Griese wasn't even supposed to start that game. It was supposed to be Bubby Brister. It was his job. Griese was supposed to kind of just hang out, but Bubby Brister had a really bad preseason. I mean, he just had a ton of interceptions, and Griese won that job. It was kind of exciting, of course, as a Dolphin fan, right? You grew up with. I mean, Bob Griese was a little bit before my time, but my dad was a huge fan, and so seeing his son, it was kind of interesting, in Denver to see this game and have him take over. It was a little bit, like you said, that first touchdown, you're like, oh no, here we go. It's funny that you mentioned Luke McCaffrey instead of Christian, all of that. Funny enough, random sidebar story, their mother, Absolutely. Lisa McCaffrey, I actually played high school soccer with. She's actually from Miami. I went to high school with her. Nice. She went on to play soccer at Stanford, where she met Ed. They got married and had, 4, 3, whatever, ridiculously athletic boys.
Yeah.
But she never gets the credit for the athleticism as well. But she was an amazing soccer player. I remember ESPN came to my high school to do some sort of piece on her before she went to Stanford. So she doesn't get a lot of credit in that gene pool, but she absolutely, she's there.
It all adds up between them too. Lisa McCaffrey, get Lisa and Ed together, and Christian McCaffrey, maybe the best running back in the NFL right now, and Luke McCaffrey, fantasy football fascination. But Griese gets a nice spin on the ball downfield there, looking like his father Bob, winning those 2 Super Bowls with the Dolphins. Yep. The franchise has gotten none since. Only made to the big show once in January '85. Losing to the Niners handily, but they're only field goal dogs. The game at Stanford University, which I don't understand how that doesn't get counted as a home Super Bowl. It's closer than the Niners' current stadium is to San Francisco. But Marino, only in his 3rd year, did it feel like only a matter of time before he got back there? Probably sometime in the 80s.
Yeah, it's funny. So that specific game. So I was 12 or 13, something like that. My dad took my sister, who's 4 years older than me. She got to go to that Super Bowl. And the whole plan was I get to go to the next one. And there was no next one. And now my father sadly passed away. So there was no next one. I did get to go to an actual Super Bowl later, but clearly it wasn't the Dolphins because they haven't been back. But yeah, he took my sister. Obviously they got crushed and it was brutal. But they at least got to have that experience. And yeah, I mean, it basically pretty much was a home Super Bowl, but everyone thought he'd get back. I mean, he did it so early, and the team, I mean, that team was so good. They had, in the 80s, they had Mark Clayton and Mark Duper, the two wide receivers on the outside. They had so much talent on those teams. There's no way you thought they wouldn't make it back. And they just, the way the NFL goes, they just never did.
Oh, that's brutal. What Super Bowl did you get to go to?
I went to, I don't know the actual number, but it was the 49ers against the Chargers. Like, it was two California teams. It was in Miami. I want to say 90.
Yeah, January 95.
Yeah, I just graduated from college, and I was doing an internship at CNN Sports. And my dad was able to get me tickets through some sort of Miami connection. My family is original Dolphin season ticket holders. Like, day one, the expansion team, like, my sister still has those tickets, which is great. But yeah, so my dad got me tickets and I went. We were in literally the very top row. It wasn't a very exciting game, but it was the only Super Bowl I got to go to. It was fun.
Yeah, and the Dolphins had a good shot at that. I'll recommend folks, after listening to this one, check out an episode from season 1 I have with Denny Carter on the 94 divisional Dolphins at Jack Murphy in San Diego. Had a big lead there, and it gets away. The Chargers
Denny's my fellow Dolphin fan out there in the fantasy universe.
The pain of some of those 90 games in early 2000s.
Those were lean years.
Yeah. Hopefully this show's a therapeutic episode or therapeutic exercise, given I feel like I do a decent amount of 90s and 2000s Dolphins games, something about them. So I imagine, like, when they go play the Chargers and they're up and you have the Steelers in the next round, you're thinking might be playing a home Super Bowl. Were you starting to anticipate that?
No, I think it's one of those things you just, at this point, you don't anticipate because there's so much of the heartbreak. But then I will say this. So I'm also a Georgia Bulldog fan. I went to the University of Georgia. I lived through decades and decades of heartbreak, and then we finally got 2 national championships in a row. So I will say that I've now kind of changed my mindset on that there is hope for the hopeless. Those franchises that you're just like, it's never going to happen, no matter how close you are. Because Georgia specifically, I mean, they were close for many, many years. I mean, they were top 10 for many, many years, and then would always just lose that one important game, or, in college football, you can't really lose or you're done. And that's just how it was. So with the Dolphins, I think, there's a lot of heartbreak there. And unfortunately, I missed the 72 perfect season. So we're still waiting. It's just one of those things. I feel like this era that we're in now, I've got a little bit more hope, right? But there were some really lean years, and I'm sure you've probably done them on the show. The early 2000s, and when it was just, the bad quarterback after bad quarter. After Marino, it was just kind of a carousel of bad quarterbacks, which is kind of what's happened with this Denver team, really. After Elway, there was kind of that bad carousel, and then Manning came and then saved them, right? Another Super Bowl, and then now they've gone through that same carousel of bad quarterbacks here in Denver.
Something to be appreciated when you have a quarterback.
Yeah.
The Dolphins and Broncos both illustrated that over the past 40 years, the A/B test for your team and your prospects and the hope and season.
People don't realize, like, in the NFL, you're like, oh, they're all whatever, but it really, when you live through those lean years where it's just horrible quarterback play, and it's wasting a lot of good talent too. That's what's rough on some of these teams. You're wasting really good players that just don't have the valuable targets, and they don't have them.
This Dolphins team here in 99 had some talent, particularly in defense, but a little more firepower in offense than the year before. The announcers seemed pretty bullish on that idea. Tony Martin there. But Dolphins about to go down 10-0 on a chip shot for Jason Elam in the second quarter. Blocked and returned to Broncos territory by Terrell Buckley, getting it done at cornerback and on special teams. Marino moments later with a beautiful back shoulder seam to O.J. McDuffie. And then Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Some might say the Gus Edwards of Ben Jarvis Green Ellis's 1-yard touchdown run. Tie game. How critical was this few-minute sequence to the Dolphins finding themselves in the second quarter here?
It was. In fact, one thing I wrote down when watching this game or rewatching this game, special teams was pretty big for this game. There was that blocked field goal, like you said. Jason Elam got blocked in the second quarter. Miami blocked a punt later on in the second quarter as well. And then there was Elam missed a field goal. They were down 17, so the Broncos needed that field goal in the fourth quarter. They wouldn't have gotten there anyway, but he missed a field goal there too. So special teams was pretty important here in this game. But yeah, I think you mentioned Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I completely forgot about him until watching this game. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot they had a running back named Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And they actually were talking about his jersey. It just said Abdul on the back. There was some sort of a trademark situation where he couldn't actually have his real name on the back of his jersey because of other Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So his jersey just said Abdul, which I found interesting. But yeah, it was pretty crucial because I think without that, at that point it's a 7-7 game. And I think that, gave Miami the confidence to keep on going. I do want to say one thing before that I thought was funny that I wrote down. We kind of had the early phases of what is a catch. There was a Rod Smith catch earlier on in that game that they it would have been nice for the Broncos to have on that drive. It was 3rd and 5, and I'm sorry, Rod Smith. It ended up being an incomplete, but to me, he made a football move, right? And it would have been a fumble, and then Miami would have gotten the ball, but Denver got to keep it. But I thought that was kind of funny. It was the early phases of like, what is a catch?
The first high-profile use of instant replay following its return for that 99 season. It's a week ahead of this episode, I'm doing the 98 wild card. Niners receiver, you may have heard of him, Jerry Rice, fumbles pretty clearly on replay at least, but no replay at the time. And they go on to Steve Young hits Terrell Owens in the last play. And this next season, week 1 here, we have replay. And the announcers are explaining how this whole novel concept of replay works.
That's crazy. I didn't even realize that. That's hilarious. I assumed, I guess I never realized when it came into play, but I mean, now obviously we can't live without it. There's so many replays for everything.
So yeah, if anyone wants to see the time and place of instant replay, back-to-back episodes here in this feed with Jennifer Eakins and Rich Rebar. And here in the first half, it goes the Dolphins' way. Jimmy Johnson seems really pissed. Like it's interesting the way that for the first time you lose something that you feel like is supposed to go your way. I feel like if replay had been in the league a few years already, he wouldn't be that pissed. But like he seems like really mad.
He's always pissed though. He has a couple explosions every game. I mean, come on, let's be real. There's a point later in the fourth quarter where he's pissed, and they're up by like 17. There's no reason for him to be pissed. They're playing really well. They're gonna win this game clearly, and he still has a full explosion on the sideline. And his hair stays in place. That's how that works.
I don't know Jimmy Johnson as well as intimately as a Dolphins fan, but it just seemed like he was seething after that replay. He's like, what? We did all this, and we had this huge stoppage of play, and they can't even get the call right, at least in his view. But there's a span of less than 15 minutes where the Dolphins scored 24 unanswered in the middle of this game. So instead of 10-0 Broncos, we got 24-7 Dolphins. You mentioned some good players around Marino, both on defense. They have Jason Taylor back, but on offense, they didn't have Richmond Webb against the Broncos last time around. Got him back at left tackle. That's also huge. A little back and forth with Shannon Sharp over the previous couple off seasons. Sharp said Don't ask me about Marino. I don't want to talk about losers after the divisional loss. He also said, I told the Dolphins, how does it feel to have the Super Bowl at your house and you're not invited?
Oof.
And Broncos just go crush the Falcons at Pro Player Stadium on your turf. Now you're at Denver week 1 for the commemoration. Would you guess there's a little extra sauce on it for Marino here?
I'm sure. It's funny that Shannon Sharp is still that way now, still doing his thing. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a lot involved there. I mean, I would think also, right, with every passing year that he's not going back to the Super Bowl, and he's getting older at this point. I thought I would see him with that big knee brace, but I guess that came a little later. When I saw the clip, I was definitely, you remember at the end of his career, he had this massive, like Tron-like thing on his knee that he was playing with. But I'm sure as time went on, they're all from the same. I mean, they're from the same draft class, right? You've got those two and Jim Kelly, right? Weren't they all in the same draft class?
Yeah.
I'm sure they had their own inner rivalry, whether we as fans did or not. So I'm sure, like you said, I'm sure there was some extra sauce wanting to come in on Monday night, week 1, and do some damage, which they did.
Yeah, interesting there. Shannon Sharp and Dan Marino had the same agent, which is wild. But apparently, like his grandma called him after and was like, "That was wrong, man." And Sharp was like, yeah. So he like went and apologized to Marino and said like that that was the thing he regretted most in his career. But
Interesting. I don't remember that.
But there is like a thing where, I mean, you guys are on the Broncos team, you might internalize this more, but like, they're on this NFL Today set later on for I think quite a few years together. Sometimes it would come up how much a Super Bowl matters, and Sharp is like, yeah, if you want to be considered one of the greatest, you got to have a Super Bowl. And then Marino would be like, oh yeah, I guess it's the one thing I don't have. And then Sharp would be like, but I mean you're better than a lot of guys who do have Super Bowls though. And he'd like, but a reasonable but probably painful exchange that they would end up having just for decades on later. And it's probably, as mentioned, not lost on Marino that Broncos winners of the last 2 Super Bowls, and here Marino has a chance for some measure of redemption on commemoration night for the Broncos and for Elway.
Yeah, it was an Elway retirement ceremony at halftime.
Did you have to leave the room and do something else during the halftime? Was it too much?
Well, I will tell you this: I was actually at the game, so I did not leave the room. I was in the stadium at Mile High for that game, so I was there. I'm sure I probably went to the bathroom or something, but I was actually at this game, which makes it more fun to talk about. I went with a friend of mine from work at that time who was also a Dolphin fan, so we were one of probably very few in that building, and we were in the very, very upper deck and were screaming. It was fantastic.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Gets some redemption for Marino here. He's looking good. Doesn't throw a ton of passes, just 23, but he's efficient. 15 for 23 on the day. Is really cooking in that middle portion where they go up. 15 for 23, 215 yards. So that's coming out to, close to 10 yards an attempt. Pretty good. And spoiling the debut. But were you impressed with young Brian here?
I thought he was fine it's a big stage, right? Not only is it your first NFL game, but you're on Monday Night Football, which is that was the first game of the season. That was before they did the Thursday night. Now it's a Thursday night game. Yeah. So that was literally the first game of that season. And I think he did all right. I mean, he wasn't fantastic, but I think that he was fine. For what it's funny, they interviewed Bob at some point, and he was kind of nitpicking, certain things about certain, which I thought was funny. But I mean, he had 270 yards and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So I mean, you can't really, for a young guy like that to come out and not only does he have the pressure of he's replacing John Elway after winning a Super Bowl. Then he's got, his dad's shadow as well. It's a lot. So, and I'm sure people were upset because, like I said, he wasn't supposed to be the starter. It was supposed to be Robbie Brister. Not that he's that great or anything, but I'm sure people would have rather had a veteran in there than a rookie like that. So I think he did fine for what was asked of him. I mean, unfortunately, his career didn't end up being what I'm sure he would have liked. But that game itself, I thought he was fine.
Steadies himself, as mentioned, no picks. Coming out in his debut, throwing 40 passes against the number 1 defense in the league from the previous year, and they're still going to be good here in 99. He does, steady himself, hits Ed McCaffrey for a second touchdown late in the third quarter. So it looks like they could be back in this one. It's a 24-14 game going into the fourth quarter. Dan Marino starts making a few plays again. A drive concluding with a 4-yard touchdown pass to O.J. McDuffie to stretch it back out to 3 scores. And so at that point, you're not expecting Brian Griese to get them back in this, even though he does get them in position to cut it down to a 2-score deficit. But Elam misses relatively short field goal. Griese's big mistake, sack fumble, hangs in the pocket too long. Jason Taylor takes it back. And next thing you know,
it was a scoop and score.
Yep. Scoop and score for the Dolphins, and that effectively puts it away. At this point, are you thinking, hey, with this possibly last year with Marino and Johnson, like probably the last dance for the whole team, that we could actually make good on this final shot?
I mean, yeah, right. How do you not think that? It's week 1. You get a huge win. I mean, that was the Broncos hadn't lost at home since December of 1995 to Seattle. So, we're talking 4 years of straight home wins. They do that, and they won handedly. I mean, it wasn't like it was a fluke, crazy last-second field goal win. I mean, they beat this team. So you got to think, all right, they have a shot this year. We're gonna, and it was a great start. You can't be upset with that. There's nothing about that that leaves a bad taste in your mouth or anything. You think, okay, maybe Marino's going to finally get his thing, but it didn't happen. But that game itself is still great, right? It's still exciting. You still, like I said, you hand them their first home loss. They're coming off a winning Super Bowl, so you get a loss there. And yeah, it was nice as a Dolphin fan to come into, because Mile High is not easy to play at in general. I mean, it's just not. It's still not. I mean, it's super loud. I mean, it's not as loud as some other places, but it is loud. And you have the altitude, which is an issue for people. So it was nice to come in there, for a sea level. And I remember actually, because like I said, I was at the game, and I weirdly remember what I was wearing. And so I think, it was somewhat coldish because I know I was wearing a sweatshirt. So, it wasn't like a weather game or anything, but it was September, but it was probably chilly for some of the Miami players.
I mean, yeah, like Denver and Miami, it seems like those are the 2 teams that play particularly well at home in September.
Mm-hmm.
And Miami with the heat and with what looks like the opposing sideline is in the sun.
Yep.
And with the Broncos, you got the altitude getting used to that earlier in the season. How much of an advantage is that do you feel like for those 2 teams? And do you feel like the Dolphins' home advantage is either stronger or less daunting than what Mile High presents?
I think back then it was. I don't know what it's like now because I haven't even been to the new, what is it, the Hard Rock Stadium, or I don't even know what it's called anymore. But I grew up with the Orange Bowl, and then what turned into Joe Robbie Stadium, which I think became Pro Player Stadium, but it was the same stadium. but I feel like in my childhood, like the Orange Bowl, like you said, it was always so hot, and the visitors were always in the sun, so they were getting pounded. So I think it's one of those things where you have to get used to. I actually, I've lived in Denver now for 25 years. I was in Florida last weekend, and it was miserable. I mean, I'm not even kidding. It was like 95 and like 95% humidity. I was uncomfortable just walking to the car. So I cannot imagine having to play a football game. Now, granted, it's July, right? Not September, but still, I think it provides an advantage for people that are not used to the heat or the humidity, because humidity is no joke. Like when you don't live in it, I know most of the country does, but like here in Denver, we don't have any. So when you get there, it's disgusting. I can't function. And then conversely here, I think the altitude, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it does play a factor for some. I mean, we're only at 5,000 feet, right? A mile high, 5,280. I think if you go to like the mountains and try to play football in Breckenridge at 9,000 feet, that's major. Denver, I guess it probably does affect some people in certain ways, but I don't think it's as bad. Like, I think when it comes to like other sports, right? Baseball, clearly, right? The air with the home runs and all of that. But I think as far as your cardio, I think if you're a football player and you're in shape, like I don't think it's that. To me, I don't think it would be that drastic. But then again, I am not a player that's out there for 4 hours. So,
Yeah, I'm not a professional athlete. I do know if I go straight from Denver airport to a pre-wedding event and have a beer, I'm practically knocked on my ass.
oh, really? Okay. So, yeah, I mean, to me,
That
like,
altitude.
yeah, I mean, living here at 5,000 feet, like it just seems so normal that to me, I don't think it's a big deal, but it probably is. I know, when you go to some of the mountain towns, it's definitely got to drink a lot of water. You got to relax and you can't drink as much. But yeah.
First couple hours out of the plane, I'm a little shook, but I come from a very, very, very humid, close to sea level location in Washington, D.C. At the time of this game, had just begun playing fantasy football. This is the first Monday night beat I had as a fantasy football player. Perhaps the greatest sports meltdown I've ever had. Never playing fantasy football, or losing fantasy football, and then losing because the opponent had Brian Griese go for 3 touchdowns, including a garbage time score to Ed McCaffrey, to bring it to 38-21.
Brian Griese in this game? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like to me, that would be a waiver wire guy. Like I can't imagine starting. I mean, that's week 1. Like why are you starting Brian Griese? It must have been a weird league because that doesn't seem like, well, I don't know. I definitely don't remember. I mean, I was playing fantasy at this point as well, but I definitely do not remember.
Even at the time, I was like, oh, he's Brian Griese. Like, this is like the last guy, probably the last quarterback taken in or drafted that was a starter, 12-team league. And I was like, oh, here's Brian Griese going into Monday night. I have this sewn up. And then he gets that third touchdown. And I think I was like 11 or so. And I had just a total meltdown. I could not believe.
That's funny. That makes sense. God, you were only 11.
I wasn't emotional.
Yeah, no, listen, I get it. I have a teenage boy. I know the emotional. I can imagine, that. That's funny. Yeah, it's funny when people talk about how they all started fantasy so young. And I mean, I was in my 20s when I started, but that was when most people were in this business that were 10 and 11 anyway. But yeah, I can't imagine playing fantasy football in my teens. I don't know how that would have been. I didn't start. I think I was 20. I was like 23 or 24 when I first started. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm more emotionally well-adjusted now. But at that period and with that first experience, getting Brian Griese on Monday night in his debut, was almost too much to take.
Yeah, clearly it's sticking with you because I get it. I mean, that's a tough one. Listen, we all have those random games that you remember, but it's more painful when, like you said, it's something like that. Like it's not even like, okay, Troy Aikman did this or whatever. I mean, you're talking Brian Griese. That's tough.
Yeah, just by myself yelling in my parents' basement. Why? Yeah. Or something like that. Why, Griese? Why? But yeah, surprisingly, Terrell Davis didn't go off in this game. Only like 60 yards rushing, 3 yards a carry after 10 yards a clip and 200 yards in the 199 in the divisional round the previous year. It's kind of like a shocking game on a few levels. Ed McCaffrey, 6 for 105 and 3 touchdowns. It's absolutely going off. Did you have any like Broncos or Dolphins investment this year, or what are your big like fantasy memories from around this period of time?
I definitely had Ed McCaffrey for sure. At times, I can't remember this specific year at all, but I know I definitely had some Ed McCaffrey in my day. And I did have Terrell Davis. Like I said, I went to University of Georgia, so I was a Terrell Davis fan anyway. So I definitely had him. And yeah, like you said, he was very quiet in this game. I don't know if this was kind of the start. I don't remember when he retired, if he went this whole season, or I can't remember, but I think it was kind of the beginning of the end for him there. But yeah, I don't remember. That's the funny thing. Like my fantasy, it's all very cloudy. I mean, unless you show it to me on paper, like all the years blend for me with fantasy, which is a bummer. Like I do remember certain things. Like as far as the Broncos go, I had very good years with the Eric Decker, Peyton Manning, that combo. I had that, and which did me well later on. But this era, I don't remember any of my teams. I remember my very first pick in 1996 was Ricky Waters. I know that for sure. But after that, it gets very foggy for about 10 years of fantasy at least.
Again, I remember specifically this year because I had not figured out how much of my emotional welfare to tie into my fantasy football team and how much I should devote to going and making friends at school. But like, my fantasy football team could be my friends. No, right. Root for them and have a good time. So I eventually learned that, but I also remember getting wrecked by the team that had that Kurt Warner. I was like, what? This guy just like picked up Kurt Warner and now he's just tearing.
Yes.
Now I have no chance.
Yes, the Kurt Warner era. That was that was an interesting one. I wish I remembered. Like it's a bummer that I don't remember a lot of that. And a lot of it, unfortunately, the early days of fantasy football for me were not online. So like there's no way to even ever, there'll never be a record of it. It was all phone tree and newspaper and calling in lineups. So I think the earliest, 2008, I think is the first computerized one that one of my leagues has. But other than that, it's kind of just memories. It's a bummer.
Yeah, and I honestly, it's all blur. Everything else in the early 2000s fantasy football wise, I distinctly remember this Week 1 Monday night game. That's like my fantasy football memory that is not washed out in that like first 6-year span. It was like fun that you chose this game. I was like, oh god, I remember having a mental breakdown over my introduction to fantasy football.
It was hard. Honestly, it's hard to pick a game. There were so many good ones that I was thinking about, but I mean, this one was a fun one, but there's so many like this. I think it's interesting, this whole podcast here that you do, because there's so many different ones and they have different memories for different reasons. It's like I have, and I don't remember the years, so whatever, but there was a playoff game between between the Dolphins and the Chargers when I was little, with Dan Fouts. It was a playoff game. And I remember I was on a plane from Colorado to Miami, and the whole plane, we had like the pilot put it on the little headset, like back when there was radio and we were all like screaming on this plane, and it's just crazy memory. I mean, the Dolphins lost, but I do remember it was in the 80s sometime, because I remember I was a little kid, but that game, like there's all these little games that have these weird memories that you have, and it isn't necessarily the actual game of what happened, but you just the stuff surrounding the game that you remember more, or at least me.
I mean, where you were and who you're with is probably such a huge deal. And being on a plane is like such a unique, fun capsule of a way to experience it.
And the whole plane was screaming. I mean, it was a playoff game. So it was, I think we were on the way home we used to go skiing every year in Colorado. And so, we had the pilot put it on we all had our little headphones plugged in or whatever. And they ended up losing, which sucked, but it was still fun.
Here in 99 in Marino's final game. He actually gets one more playoff dub on the record there again in Seattle, but then Jacksonville Jaguars and their Florida neighbors do not treat them well here. Did it seem like the season, his final run, was petering out? And how much hope was there And how long did that last for that final Marino run?
Yeah, I think at the end of this, it was pretty much. I think the hope was dwindling because, like you said earlier, I think Jimmy Johnson was close to being done, and we really didn't know where they were going to go coach wise, and Marino clearly was on the downward track as far as we all know, right? There's a cliff for players. I mean, Tom Brady was kind of the alien robot that didn't really have that happen, and he kind of left before it really happened. But we saw it with Peyton Manning here in Denver later, and they just finally hit a wall. And I think Marino had already kind of started to get to that point, so I think it was kind of a reality, like, okay, this is probably not going to happen.
This has been another episode of Remember That Game. Please rate, review, subscribe, and check out more episodes.